What is up? It is Friday, May 23rd, 2025. Here are the items I've been dealing with this week that I'll touch on today. So it's the first week after signing the franchise developer agreement. Signed that last Friday. So have had a good week, although not a lot of action there, but I'll touch on that a little bit later. It also happens to be the first week since we officially closed on the boutique resort property. So now that we've officially closed on it, I will be able to share some details around that project. We're also planning a family move, right? So I'm trying to think now. I don't know how much information I've been sharing sort of about the personal situations on like names. I think I've started to lately. So anyways, we do live today in Mariposa. That is, an hour and 15 north of Fresno. And, as I shared last week, now that we've signed with FCI, Floor Coverings International, the territories I picked up are in the East Bay. And so that's where we're going to be moving. And so we are looking into targeting Danville, San Ramon. That's pretty much where the territories are. I've got some friends that live in that area as well. And so I think that's where we're going to be going to. So lots to sort of think through there. I think we got to find a house and, I guess multiple houses that we like. And, we'll have to submit the applications. And we need to be able to move in July 2nd and 3rd. So that's going to come up pretty quick. That also then means, that the primary residence, the one I'm sitting in right now, it was supposed to be our forever home. We are not selling it, right? So we're going to add that into the investment portfolio. It's an Airbnb. We already have guests showing up on June 12th. So you can see there's a little bit of a difference in the dates. So we need to be out of this house by June 12th, while we need to find a house to move into July 2nd or 3rd. And so we already have an Airbnb in Fresno that we're going to go stay in we have it for 4 weeks. But we got to come back to this house to pick up our stuff and then move over to the East Bay. So some things to sort of logistically juggle there, which is pretty exciting. Doesn't add to the stress at all, of course. And just some other things that have popped up with our property management business. And so I've been helping Jazzy navigate some of that stuff as well, because she's been needing to spend some time on the back end working with some lawyers, right? Being a business owner, it's always fun when you've got former employees that want to try to take advantage of you. So some interesting things we're working through there, but not going to spend too much time on that. So let's just jump in. For the franchise developer agreement that I did sign, the things that I've been focusing on this week and this last week have been around getting the business entity started, right? It's something that I thought about before, and I kind of thought I already knew exactly what I was going to do. And so you have your business entity, right? That's either the LLC or the S Corporation or the C Corporation, right? You need to get that set up, and you got to get that structured properly. And then you got to get your funding in order. Now, both of those situations are sort of tied together, right? Depending on how you want to fund your business can also then dictate what type of a business entity you have to have. So there can be some challenges there depending on how you want to structure your business, depending on where the funding comes from. So I think for today, that is what I will do the deep dive on, sort of my thinking and my decision making and where I ended up. And so I'll touch on that in a little bit. The boutique resort, right? So now that we officially closed, like I said, I can share some additional details. The resort itself is going to be called Oakstone. It is about 8 acres. It's right outside of Yosemite's Southgate entrance. It's about 30 minutes to the entrance through Oakhurst. And it's about 4 miles away from Bass Lake, which is also a heavy tourist area. The existing infrastructure, it's got 7 existing Airbnb units. We're going to convert that to 8. It's one building. There is a 12,000 square foot event center that we're also going to be renovating, and that's going to be used for weddings, events, and or other other types of just events, right? And then it's got 36 RV spots. The event center, of course, also comes with a full kitchen and a bar. and so the resort itself comes with a full liquor license. So that is going to be a very nice and lengthy project. It's going to be in a couple of phases. Phase one is we're as quickly as possible going to try to do some light rehab and get this ready so that we can actually have visitors come this year. So I think the 7 Airbnb units, we're going to get those ready as quickly as possible. The RV parking spots that we have, we'll get them cleaned up. This property hasn't really been used. The old owners didn't necessarily take care of it that well. So we'll get the RV spots cleaned up, and we'll get people that can come over and park their RVs for the summer as well through the end of the year. And we might try to focus on some very light type of events, right? So maybe we'll do some food trucks coming by on Friday evenings, and we'll open up the bar for some beer and wine, and people can kind of hang out. And if anybody really wants to rent out the event center this summer, even though it's not going to be rehabbed, then then we can sort of discuss that and negotiate that as well. So we have taken on investor money just for to get the rehab going through this year, and I believe we are full. So I don't think we need any investors there. If anybody is interested in investing in this project, you can go ahead and direct message me. I think probably later this year, maybe early next year, when we're going to start to break ground on the full project rehab. I think that's where it's going to get really interesting, right? That's where we're going to convert the existing RV parking spots, and those are going to be, Airstreams, glamping tents, glass domes, A-frames, you name it. And then we're going to add some additional spots that we'll go and excavate some of that land. And so ultimately, we're going to end up with, like I said, 8 Airbnb units in one building, but then we're also going to have close to 40 additional rental units that people can come and rent from us, right? There's going to be a pool. There's going to be a bunch of stuff that we're going to do to this property that's going to make it really, really slick. So that's it for there. But of course, as we navigate all of this, I'll share more as we kind of go along with that as well. Let's see. Getting our primary residence ready for Airbnb guests, right? That's in 3 weeks. So that's something else that we're kind of working through. One thing that kind of worries me a little bit is, man, this property is expensive, right? It was supposed to be our sort of forever home. So we invested a bunch of money into it. We did a gut remodel. It's very, very nice. But now that we're renting it out on Airbnb, right? It's no longer our house. It's a business. So, are people going to come and take care of it the way we would? Probably not. So that kind of gets built into the expectations here. But we do need to make sure that the income on this is at minimum a break even. And it's pretty expensive. So we have guests coming pretty much through June. I think we're pretty much all booked for the second half of June. And I think we're doing pretty well on July. And I think we might have a guest coming in staying. I think we got a booking for August as well. But this property definitely needs to perform really, really well in order for us to be able to afford it. If we get through the summer and it starts to get tough and we're realizing that, man, it's not performing the way we need, then we would likely sell. Considering this probably is, and I've had it on the market, so for a standard house, it's about 4,000 square feet. It sits on 80 acres. Yes, that's 80. And what we had it listed at was at 1.8. And we're not getting anybody that comes out here, right? That is crazy expensive for Mariposa. And so, even if we were to, I think we're probably into it for somewhere between 1.5 and 1.6. So if we end up having to sell, that would be pretty tough if even we just break even, right? Having owned the property and spent so much time and effort getting it to where it is today, to then, since we bought it, I think we're at 4 years now, to just break even, that would be rough. But we will see what happens. As a real estate investor, and then of course now that I don't have that W-2 paycheck, it'd be really hard if I tried to sell it to buy another house as well. So for people that don't have W-2 incomes, there are ways you can work with lenders where you just have to come up with a really big down payment if you're not going to use your income. So for us, again, we're looking at Danville, San Ramon. It's a pretty decent area. It's a very nice area, right? So you've got some really nice homes over there. So we would have to figure out a way of selling this house and whatever money we make on it, right, the cash we get, we would then need to use that as a pretty large down payment for whatever house. And I'm telling you right now, I ran some of the math and the numbers, and if I have to do 50%, I talked to my real estate broker, and he's like, yeah, Dave, you're probably gonna need to come in at 50% down payment if you want to buy a house without W-2. I don't know what kind of house we're gonna be able to buy in Danville with this kind of money. So it's kind of putting us in another interesting situation here, but don't think I have to necessarily solve that today. Okay, with that, let's do a little bit of a deep dive here on sort of creating a business entity and then financing the business, right? And so I don't know. I don't think I have to give any disclaimers here, but I'm not an accountant, I'm not a CPA, I'm not a licensed financial advisor. So I will probably just stick to high level ways of describing the process that I'm going through and the reasons I'm doing it. And then if you have questions, again, comment, let me know. I'm happy to discuss it with anybody. But before actually making any decisions, similarly to me, I tend to spend a lot of time doing research, even if I think I have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to be doing. And interestingly enough, I did a lot of research on how I was going to fund the franchise business. I was going to be using a ROBS, that's ROBS, that stands for Rollover Business Startup. And that's where you take money from your 401k, your retirement account, and that funds the business. And you can do that without any impact to the retirement account, right? You're not necessarily paying any of the penalties. The government has it set up. It's a very legit way where a lot of people use that. There are some restrictions and regulations that come with that. And so, but for probably a good month or two, that's exactly what I was going to do. As a final pressure test, it was this week. It was like literally Monday or Tuesday, I had a call with my CPA. I'd pinged him and just go, hey, I just want to run something by you. And it was a 15-minute call, and it completely changed. And I'm no longer doing a ROBS way to fund. So let's get into it. So I think the way that I would start this is it really starts with the funding. Depending on how you fund your business, that's going to determine the type of business entity you're going to need to have, right? And that's the difference. The business entity is going to be, is it an LLC? Is it an S Corp? Or is it a C Corp? The LLCs and the S Corps are very similar, while the C Corp is very different, right? Something else that I'll share, because I've talked to a lot of people about this actually, and I've got some close friends that I think initially have done this a little bit differently, but after doing a real deep dive on it, I think they also understand the value of OPM. That's other people's money. That is an actual financial term. You can Google it. That is a way for anybody. It can be corporations do it all the time, and of course, individual investors do it all the time as well, right? And similarly, one way of thinking about it is literally when you buy a house, you're essentially using other people's money, right? That's the mortgage. You're borrowing from the bank their money. You pay the down payment. That's your portion, but you're not paying cash. I follow that same sort of logic in almost every investment opportunity that I have. Like I rarely will use any of my own cash, at least if I don't have to, right? So how was I going to fund this then if I didn't want to use any of my own cash or any of my own money? So let's go with the ROBS, right? So with the ROBS and taking money out of the 401k, there's no penalties, right? But you do have to use a C corporation, and a C corporation is heavily regulated by the government, right? There's some very specific rules that you have to follow, and you will generally need to have a company or an advisor or CPA or somebody that actually helps you stay on top of the actual regulations to make sure that you don't do something wrong. And a simple way maybe of thinking about the difference between a C Corp and then an LLC and an S Corp, and I think a lot of people are usually pretty, they know what an LLC is, right? Like anybody can technically start an LLC. It's a limited liability corporation, right? Similarly with an S Corp, when you file taxes, you file that on your personal taxes. And essentially what you become is you are the owner of that business. So if you just set up a business account, you're the owner. You can take money out of that account. You can add money to that account, right? You can transfer money from your business accounts to your personal accounts. Of course, you keep track of those transactions, and and I think the simplest form, when you just add some money from your personal accounts to your, let's say, LLC or S Corp business accounts, then that is an owner contribution. You're contributing money to the business, right? And maybe a month later or whenever you withdraw money, you just transfer from your bank account, and that is just an owner distribution, right? And those kind of cancel each other out. You're the owner of the business. You can do that, right? With a C corporation, you're not the owner anymore. You are an employee. As an employee, you are not allowed to just transfer money in and out of those, right? So that's where you are forced to give yourself a salary. You have to have a salary because you're an employee of the organization, and you pay yourself that salary. So some of the drawbacks and differences here would be that if you go with a C corporation and you give yourself a salary of $75,000, that's great. That's year one. You get into year two and maybe you don't give yourself a raise and you've got, a $75,000 salary. Well, what happens when, you start seeing that you're making a bunch of money in that C corporation, right? More than your salary. And you go, hey, you know what? I actually want to pay myself more money. I'm the CEO of the business. It's my business. Well, you can take a distribution or a dividend, but then you get taxed on that, right? And when you take your W-2, you get taxed on that as well. So you're getting double taxed. That is something you go Google C Corp or use an AI agent today, and you just go ask it like, hey, what are the differences between an LLC, S Corp, and a C Corp? It's going to bring up the double taxation, right? And the business itself pays tax. So the business, the C corporation makes a bunch of money, and your corporation has to pay taxes on that. You take a salary, you have to pay taxes on that. And then if you want to take a distribution from that business or pay yourself a dividend, there's taxes on that too. So there's a double taxation. I'm not an expert on that, but from the people I've talked to, including my CPA, it's basically, if you can avoid it, you should. So then that brings me back to, if you're going to go and use money from your 401k to fund the business, then you have to go with the C Corp. So let's start with then the funding options, right? I think if we're going back to, other people's money, like cash, last thing, I wouldn't touch cash at all, right? I would try to find other ways. If you're buying an existing business, and I looked at doing that, even if you're buying an existing franchise for somebody, there are ways of doing seller financing. That should easily be the number one thing. I've talked to a few people about this. A buddy of mine, Sam, actually shared the book Millionaire, Main Street Millionaire. Talks about buying boring businesses, but there's tons of businesses out there that if you just know how to look or where to look, there's plenty of business owners that are trying to retire, trying to find somebody they can literally just hand the business off to. And a lot of times they can't find somebody and they just shut down. Hugely profitable businesses that just shut down all the time because there's nobody to buy them. In a lot of these cases, it can be very simple to do seller financing. As a fact, the boutique resort, Oakstone, that property that we bought in Oakhurst, I don't mind sharing the numbers. We negotiated that down to $1.72 million. And we bought that with 20% down between me and my 4 other partners. And the seller is giving us seller financing. It's a 10-year loan, but it's a 3rd-year amortization at 6%. You can't beat that. So technically, it's like a 6% loan over 30 years that we have to make payments on. And then we just have to be able to refinance, at some point between before the 10 years is up. But anyways, we're doing seller financing there, and it's a great deal. I know other people that have bought other types of businesses that are profitable, cash flowing, and you do seller financing, right? And not going to spend too much time on that right now. But even in the book, Main Street Millionaire, and you can Google this or use AI to search for it, there are many examples of specifically how to structure a seller financing deal and how to even ask for it. And when done right, sellers generally, right, if they have the option of, okay, do I just let my business die, or do I take 20% down payment from this new person coming in, and then I take monthly payments with interest on top, since they would have to pay, an SBA loan or another loan interest anyways, but you're just paying it to the seller. lots of times they're going to take that deal. And as the buyer of the business, a lot of times you can work in like, hey, if I'm going to be paying you, then maybe you can stay on for, months as a consultant and help me whenever I need it. So there's lots of benefits. Seller financing, amazing way to go. Um, if you're starting fresh, like I am, well, then there's no option of seller financing. So in my case, cool. So where am I going to get the money? Well, SBA, 100%, right? That's one where the SBA, Small Business Administration, right? The government essentially will back you as a business owner, or when you're starting a business. So if you go to a regular bank today, right? I go to Chase and I say, hey, I want to get a business loan. I need $500,000. They might just be like, dude, you got no business experience. Like, why would we give you $500,000? They're probably just going to say no. If you go and say, well, I want to do an SBA loan, now they're interested, because if it's under $500,000, a lot of lenders, they won't need any collateral. So then why would they be comfortable? Because the SBA, the government arm here, will come in and they'll tell the lender that we'll back it. We will go ahead, and if they default on this business, then we will pay you. We will be the security here, the security holder. And so once you go the SBA route, you've got a lot of options. I am going the SBA route, and I'm working with a broker. And this broker, I pay him a fee. I think I'm going with Fran Fund. I was introduced to them from the franchise consultant I'm working with. It's a $2,500 upfront fee, and then they will take all of my documents, right? All of my information. They'll package it up, and they're going to shop it around with a bunch of different lenders, and then they'll come back to me with, here's 3 or 5 lenders that want to give you $500,000, and then I get to pick the one I want depending on what they're offering, right? Now, going with the SBA route, and by the way, if you go with a franchise, then I don't know if it's all franchises or some franchises are, depending on maybe how long they've been in business or depending on their business rating or something, they're almost like pre-qualified in a way, where when I talk to Fran Fund and they go, oh, which franchise are you going with? And I mentioned the name FCI, they go, oh, cool. Yep, we know them. Almost as if that makes it very, like, they know that like you're going to get approved very easily, right? So I'm sure there's a ton of franchises if you go that route. That makes it even easier to get funding versus if you just came in and said, hey, I want to start my own business from scratch and you got no experience, right? So going franchise has its benefits on the lending side as well. Okay, so we're going SBA route. Well, they're generally not going to give you 100%. They're going to need to know that you've got skin in the game, right? And if the loan or it should be the loan, so maybe I'll talk about like the cost of the business, right? So for lump sum, we'll say if the business is going to cost $500,000 to start or to run and operate in the first 6 to 12 months, that's how much money you're going to need. You need $500,000. The SBA will generally, if it's at 500 or less, they'll fund up to 80% of that. So you would still need to come up with the other 20%. So in that case, great. They'll give you 400,000. You need to come up with the other 100,000. I think if you go above 500,000, that's where they might say, okay, now you need 25 or 30% down payment, and they might want to get some sort of collateral, right? You might have to actually use your house as collateral if you're going to go that route. So, but again, depending on the lender, there might be some things you can work out. So in my case, okay, so I'll need to come up with that 20%. So I have 2 options here. I have money in my retirement account. So for me, for the sake of this, let's say it's $500,000. I need to come up with $100,000. I have $100,000 in my retirement account, so I can easily use that. I also already have a HELOC on my house that has $100,000 available, and I can use that as well. So I have both of those options. Like I said, for the last 2 months, I was planning on going with the 401k, and only this week I changed my mind. I did some loose calculations too, and for an investor, they might do something similar where, okay, well, what's the cost of this, right? And so in my mind, it first came down to almost not so much what's going to cost me more, but there's a little bit of a risk factor as well. And so the 2 differences for me between using 401k and the HELOC is, if I use the 401k, well, that's my own money. it buys shares, and it technically is, if I use 100% of that money, it would be the 100% owner of that C corporation I would need to start. Okay, well, it's not technically a loan, right? My 401k becomes the owner of that company, but I don't have to pay it back. So there's no interest payment. There's no interest I'm paying on it, and there's not even a monthly payment that I need to pay back. The way that the 401k would get paid back is if I wanted to take distribution. Well, my 401k is 100% shareholder in the company. So if distributions come out, of course, that's going to go into the 401k. Or if I ever sold the business for a profit, then any profit on that business would also go back to the 401k, right? There are some things, I'm not going to get too technical here, but later on, maybe 2, 3 years, if I had enough money, could I just work with my accountant to figure out the right way of just, hey, the original investment, $100,000 came from the 401k. I want to pay it back. I want to buy out the 401k. I give them their $100,000 back. Now I become the owner of the C corporation with my own cash, and I no longer have to worry about the retirement account. But anyways, I don't have any monthly payments. That's a big deal. You're starting a new business, right? So the last thing I need is additional operating expenses that I have to pay every month. So that's a big bonus of going that route. Slight negative was when I did the math on, okay, so if I take $100,000 out of my 401k versus leaving that in there, after 10 years with compound interest, what would that value be, right? I think it was somewhere around like $600,000. I'm like, okay, so I take out $100,000 today, in 10 years, that would be $600,000. Okay. I should double check my math. $600,000 on $100,000, that doesn't sound right. And then with the HELOC, the HELOC I have is at 10%. So if I now instead borrow $100,000 from my HELOC and use that as the down payment, now then the risk is, well, now I have to pay that HELOC back at 10% every single month. So now I have an additional monthly expense that I have to pay back. And so that's something that I have to take into consideration. So it's the loss of, I take $100,000 out of my 401k. Great. No cost initially, but over time, that's money that I took out that wasn't earning money. But what it came down to, as I was talking to my CPA, both of those kind of canceled each other out. Like I could use either one and I could lose out on the 10% gains of the 401k, or I could pay the 10% gains or pay the 10% interest to the HELOC. But the difference came down to, with the HELOC, I get to do an S Corp. The other thing with the C corporation is because you are that employee of that company, you're not necessarily the owner, then you don't get a lot of the owner benefits, right? And the owner benefits can be pretty substantial. So for example, if we go with an LLC or the S Corp way, some of the owner benefits are, it makes it a lot easier. Like I said before, you can transfer money in and out, right? Now there are some things even with the C Corp, I'm sure you could swing where, you could buy a car, right? You could pay for gas, right? Are there some advantages there where the company pays for gas, the company pays for the car, the company pays for your cell phone, the company pays for other things? Yes. I do think with an LLC or an S Corp, it's a lot easier to kind of blend things in that is sometimes the personal and the business, right? And one main difference as well then is in the ability to sort of move that money around. So one way of doing this, and now with the SBA, they for sure, and you want to be careful here, right? So, and I did some reading on this. You want to be careful that you're not just moving money around and saying you're going to fund the business, because as I was talking to my CPA, he was like, look, you fund that 20% down payment of $100,000 in the HELOC. Once it goes into the bank and, once the business is, funded and then the SBA gets approved and they start giving you money, you could take that $100,000 and just take it back and pay off your HELOC. Now you're actually not using your own money to fund the business, the 20% that you put in. You just paid your HELOC back. Now you've got the SBA money that you could essentially use for the business. So technically it might seem like, well, wait a minute, then I don't actually need to use any of my own money. It was almost like I just kind of for show put that money in. That's where it gets tricky, right? I think the lenders, the SBA, there are some regulations perhaps in terms of what you might need to share, like financially, of like how money is moving where and when. And I don't think that they necessarily usually the SBA will be on some sort of a timed release where like, okay, you started your business, you get X amount of money, then you get more, then you get more. If you have a very specific expense, like you have a shop you got to build out, or you have a restaurant you got to build out, then they might give you a larger lump sum up front. So when you have an actual expense, they'll cut a check so that you can pay off that, right? But if you are doing it the right way, my understanding is that even with the HELOC, you can technically take your $100,000, you fund your business, and then you can essentially pull it back as long as you show that, like, hey, when it comes time to paying perhaps your marketing expenses, your payroll expenses, your operating expenses, you are using that money back in and you're not solely relying on the SBA. But the beauty in that is you're not paying that interest on that loan in the entirety. It seems like you're just paying that interest as you essentially start using that money. Could you get to a situation where, what if you said, hey, I need $500,000, so $100,000 of my own money, $400,000 from the SBA, that's to fund the business to break even at 12 months. Well, what if you break even at 6? Cool. You could probably go to the lender and just say, hey, look, I already broke even. So A, I don't need the extra $100,000 that you guys are supposed to give me, so cool. And I only needed to use $50,000 of my own money, so cool. So there are some ways that you can work through that I think can be very advantageous, and especially when I think of being able to kind of move money around and being the business owner of an S Corp. Talked to the CPA, he agreed that is likely the best option to go with. So that's what I am going with. Did talk to a friend who owns a restaurant in the East Bay, and she told me that she had, used $80,000 of her own cash to acquire a restaurant, and she's trying to have it break even. I think she's been running and operating it for months, maybe 6 months or more. And it's one of those things where, from a lot of research, talking to a lot of people, there's definitely a bunch of different books that on the subject of funding and how much money you essentially need. And I think one of the biggest things that hurts businesses the most is not having enough capital. So if you think that, well, I don't want to take a loan for whatever reason, or you can't get a loan and you actually fund it with cash, you really need to make sure you have a lot of cash ready, because most people will tell you if they're a business owner, you're going to bleed, you're going to use a lot more money than you anticipated. And if you are able to get loans up front and you have cash ready to go when needed, that's a much better strategy, because once your business is up and running, in those first 2 years, once the business is up and running, if you're not making profit, then it gets really hard, if not near impossible, to get additional funding through a loan, right? So anyways, I will leave it there for now. Actually, I'm gonna add one thing. On the SBA, I looked it up. I keep using the $500,000 number. I saw something that, depending on the loan amount, the larger the amount you go, the lower the interest rate can be. So like if someone's just borrowing $50,000 to an SBA, or $100,000, okay, maybe the rate's going to be 10, 12%. But once you get up to the 350,000 plus, the rates start to go down. Here's the other thing. If you're working with a broker, then you're going to have the lenders compete, right? So that's another advantage there too. So there's some things I'm thinking about as well of, great, I want as much money so that I have that readily available. I would rather go to the SBA and get a much larger loan than what's probably even needed. But to have it there in case I need it, I'd rather have extra money that I don't use. I think that's the main thing I would say, and I would want to get that done through the SBA. So anyways, any questions, any comments, drop them, ping me. I have had a few people that are pinging me, asking a bunch of separate questions. I think this financing one and why I'm going with, the route that I'm going with. So I figured I'd touch on that today. One thing I definitely want to touch on soon is the pro forma. The pro forma, right? That's your forecasting model for your income, your revenue, all of your operating expenses. And that essentially put together really well should predict when you're going to break even and what your first 12 months is going to look like, right? And that's something you really need to get buttoned up. And it should be in a really, really good place before any sort of official dotted line gets signed on any business. So, all right.